Hey listeners, I love making this podcast, and I think it's important work. I love sharing these conversations with you, but it takes time and money to make it happen. I need your help to keep making it and bringing you these conversations. Would you consider supporting this podcast with a monthly donation? Monthly supporters will receive bonus content and access to patron-only benefits through Patreon. You can go to the website, wdtatpodcast.com, and click on support to make a donation or sign up for the Patreon. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support. On this episode, Ashley Bean Thornton tells me how to invite mean people to breakfast, and her secret for getting groups of bankers to hug, while I try to get the Big Green Egg to be our first sponsor. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about things we're not supposed to, learn how to have difficult conversations, and talk to people about what makes them different. This is the We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land podcast, where we do talk about that with me, Lucas Land.
It's never the right place or time. It's imperceptible to the eye. It's never the right place or time.
My guest today is Ashley Bean Thornton from Waco, Texas. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley.
Well, glad to be here, Lucas.
Now, I'm always a little bit jealous of you because you have three names.
I know, right?
And I've always wanted, I don't really have a name that works with three names, but I've always wanted to be, maybe with initials like a C.S. Lewis, but a Ashley Bean Thornton. It's pretty
awesome.
So I don't know if you, if you could work on a nickname for me or a three-name combo that I could have, maybe, just let me know. Yeah. So you and I have gotten to know each other over the years from working in Waco.
Yes, we're so lucky.
Yeah. And you were working, I think, when we first met, and for many, many years at Baylor University in community engagement. Is that right?
I did. That was kind of the last thing I did at Baylor. I started out doing training and development there, but
oh, okay.
But by the time I left, I was kind of in community engagement.
Yeah. Well, and you are, as a person living in Waco, very engaged with the community. You seem to be, you seem to be always at many things. When I lived in Waco, if I showed up at something more often than not, you would also be there. And you also started a project recently, just before we moved to Bolivia, called Waco Walks.
Yes.
And I proudly wear my Waco Walks t-shirt in Bolivia, even though nobody here really cares or knows what it's about. I get comments every once in a while, but mostly people think, oh, that's a weird shirt that you're wearing. Or cool. It's very
makes
cool.
More sense in context.
It does make a little more sense in Waco. Well, first I wanted to maybe you can talk a little bit about what we, just before we started recording, you and I were both saying that we have this habit of starting projects, of filling up our plates, maybe more than full often. And what is it that drives that, do you think, for you, especially with working in the community, not just starting little projects on your own that are just your own thing, but things that really are you being out, engaging with other people, connecting, and doing community kind of work?
I don't know. It's hopeless. Well, the funny thing about that is that I didn't really grow up that way. I have not always been this way. Yeah. I had kind of a life-changing experience in 2006.
Really?
Having to do with Hurricane Katrina cleanup. So I went with a group of youth from our church to New Orleans to help with Hurricane Katrina cleanup. So that was a year after Hurricane Katrina was actually in 2005.
Yeah.
But we went to New Orleans to help with this cleanup work in 2006. And while we were down there, it just was kind of like, of course, the devastation from the hurricane was still terrible, but it was only still terrible in certain parts of town. And by that, I mean the place where mainly poor people lived.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, you know, I was 45 when I went down there, but I don't think I had ever really thought about all the implications of that. And going down there, it was kind of like somebody had taken the lid off the shoebox of New Orleans, you know, and kind of revealed sort of the systems at work.
Yeah.
And while we were down there, you know, we were with our youth group. And so a very typical thing at the evenings is to get together with your group and kind of debrief the day. And as we were debriefing the day one day, one of our youth, a high school kid, said, well, you know, it's interesting that everybody is so engaged with all of this conversation here in New Orleans, but it's just the same in Waco. And of course, that was completely true, but I had never thought about that once. I mean, it just wasn't a part of my life at all to kind of think about the city overall. And so that kind of flipped a little switch with me. And I think for me, it's not so much that I'm, you know, there are so many people in Waco who are super nice people, like, you know, great with kids or, you know, Meals on Wheels, you know, going and visiting elderly people or, you know, doing such great work with just all kinds of different groups. And that's not really my thing. I'm more interested in kind of the overall systems.
Yeah.
And so I started trying to learn as much as I could about the overall system. I still don't feel like I've got that figured out very well, but I think that's what kind of inspires me to do all these little projects, is that it's a way of trying to figure out, you know, how does this overall system work, and is there a way that we could make it better? I mean, is it possible for a community to decide, well, we want to be better. We don't want to have as much poverty, or we want to have better schools, or we want to have a, you know, more sustainable environment.
Yeah.
You know, can we do that together? Can we figure out how to do that together? So I'm fascinated with that idea of how we make that work, how we figure out how to build the kind of community that we want.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think since you and I share that, I tend to be a big picture kind of systems person too. It kind of draws me into a lot of different areas, and it often seems to keep me from specializing or getting
right.
too...
Or getting anything actually done.
It does feel like that. Sometimes it does feel like that. Like, well, I know a lot about a lot of different things. I'm kind of an armchair economist and, you know, armchair development guy, or armchair farming sustainability. Right. But I don't have like the credentials or experience to, you know, show up and be an expert on almost anything.
Correct. That's the way I am.
Yeah.
I'm not even armchair. I just am kind of curious about all those things.
Yeah.
I haven't even attained armchair status.
Well, maybe I'm giving myself too much credit. I've given myself the armchair badge or something. Yeah.
But yeah.
I saw this book, which I haven't read, but it piqued my interest, and it was called How to Do Everything. And
oh my gosh!
The just basic.
I have to get that book.
Yeah, the basic premise of the book was this idea that we have to specialize or have to go deep in one area or become an expert and really good at one thing is kind of a lie, and that not all of us. Some people do that, right? And that fits their personality, and thank God for those people and the scientists that are not dabbling in science, but doing like real science.
Right. Actually doing real science.
Yeah. But the idea was, for some people, maybe people like you and me, we it's okay that we do a whole bunch of different things, and we shouldn't feel bad about it. And I thought, yeah, that's great. I need to stop feeling so bad about it, because often I feel like, well, I don't really know much about anything, or I sort of, you know, am always shifting gears and, you know, wanting to do something different or try something else or learn about something different. And I think there is a real benefit, like you're saying, when you see things from different perspectives, or you need to do that when you think about things from a bigger perspective. You don't necessarily need to be an expert on everything because you can rely on. Yeah, you can't.
You obviously can't be an expert on it. And I think when you study something really deeply, I haven't done this with very many things, but for example, when I was doing training and development, I went pretty deep in that, and I piled up some hours of doing that, and that was probably the thing that I had the most actual expertise in as a career. So there's a way of thinking that comes with going deeply into something, but once you've done that, it kind of it's like that old saying about what is it, to a carpenter every tool is a hammer, or something like that. But the idea is you only see your way of fixing things,
right? Right. To a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes, that's it.
That's it.
Much better. I know, something about hammer.
Something like that.
But and there's a certain there's a kind of learning that you only get by going deeply into something,
right?
And you can a lot of times take that kind of learning and apply it to other things,
Yeah.
But I think it also, the more deeply you get into something, the more it shuts off other things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and coming back to this idea of working in the community and the work that you've been doing since that Katrina experience, when you have a maybe broader scope, or you dabble in a lot of things, or you're interested in a lot of things too, it makes engaging people in the community easier, because you can talk to people about lots of different things. Or if you don't know, like you said, you're very curious. You're curious about understanding more about different aspects of people that you encounter in that kind of work.
And people usually appreciate that. If you're curious about what they do, they usually appreciate that, and they're willing to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like curiosity is a theme that comes up a lot on this podcast, talking to different people about how to have hard conversations. Curiosity often is very disarming, right? When you ask somebody a question, or you're super interested in their work or what they do or their life.
Right.
People want to tell their stories and share. And so just being able to ask questions, I think, and be interested in people is a big part of that work.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So another part of working in the community, and I worked on a committee for the city for a few years before I moved, and had some experience with this. But when you work with the community and you're out engaging people, working on different issues, inevitably you're going to run across people who are not very happy, either with some group that you're working with or with an issue that you're working on. They're on the opposite side from you or something like that. Have you had that, experience of angry citizens, people being upset with you about something that you're working on?
Yes. Or not so much something that I'm working on, I guess, but I've definitely had people get mad at me about things that I said.
Yeah. Do you want to tell a story? Is there a story you can think of?
I think it's not a super exciting story, but for example, every now and then I write things for the paper, just kind of opinion columns. So, for example, one of them was about, I guess one of the semi-recent ones was after the Parkland shooting, we had a rally here to kind of express concern about all the different kinds of guns that are available in our society.
Yeah.
And so I went to that, although I don't really, rallies and marches and things like that are not really my favorite thing.
Yeah.
I always feel very uncomfortable with big crowds of people, whether I agree with them or not. I don't really like big crowds of people.
Yeah.
I just feel like once there's a big crowd, then you're not really having a conversation.
Yeah.
But anyway, after that particular rally, I wrote in the paper about my opinions, which are basically, I'm not especially, I mean, I think I'm pretty moderate in my attitudes. I don't hate guns. I don't really have any particular, I mean, I respect people's desire to have guns and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I certainly am not, some of the things that were in the paper that people were saying were, these people want to take all your guns away and they want to do, and that's not how I feel at all. But I do think that we should have more conversation about it, and there are some things that we could do to make ourselves safer, and that we should talk about what those trade-offs were. So anyway, after that was in the paper, a couple of days later, there was this letter from this person who I didn't know. I mean, and just railing about, how horrible I was. And if I had, lived in other countries where there was no freedom, then I would understand this, that, and the other. And I was like, no, what the heck? That is not even what I said. So I tracked the guy down. Oh. And emailed him and said, I wonder if we could have breakfast. I think he thought I was a lunatic then. I think he was kind of worried about me. But anyway, we ended up having breakfast, and it was very interesting. I can't even remember his name. But it was very interesting. I mean, of course, when we had breakfast, he was perfectly nice. Yeah. And it was kind of interesting because we did not end up talking about the articles at all, or the letter at all. It was fascinating because, I mean, we were complete strangers. And so, I mean, we just had breakfast, and it was like, well, obviously the reason we were having breakfast was because of these two articles, but we didn't talk about them at all. We just kind of got to know each other. And I mean, he was very forthcoming about, kind of his family and what they like to do and his business and all these kinds of things. It was just kind of an interesting experience, because the letter made it seem like he was so mad. Right. Right. But then in person, he didn't really seem like he was that mad. So.
Yeah. So you mean that even outside of Facebook, sometimes there's like letter to the editor trolls. Even
I guess so.
I feel like people often blame Facebook for that kind of interaction. But I think that's an example of people
going on for a while.
People have been writing letters to the editor for a very long time. Yeah, for a very long time.
Well, I don't know. It's interesting. But I mean, that's one kind of thing. But I guess another kind of thing is like being on a committee or something like that, where you just really disagree with somebody about how to go about something. And I've had plenty of those kinds of experiences where I feel pretty passionately that we ought to do one thing, and somebody else feels pretty passionately we ought to do something else.
Yeah, I was on a committee that nobody on the committee disagreed. In fact, the committee was all pretty they were all pretty quiet about everything, and just kind of went with what was happening. Generally, there wasn't a lot of disagreement about very much, but it was there were people that were upset about what the city was planning to do, and our committee was sort of implicated in those decisions the city was making.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I never personally got attacked, but I felt, being involved in that work and then hearing people say things that, as far as I understood, were not factually correct and things like that. It would be, it was pretty frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah. What helps you as you're, doing that kind of work and dealing with those disagreements with people about whatever ways to proceed? How are you able to do that without, burning bridges? Or maybe you have burnt bridges and you can help.
I have burned a few bridges.
Help us learn from that experience too. But maybe what helps you when you have those conflicts, or maybe when do you decide that it's worth burning a bridge? I don't know.
Right. Well, one of the things that's been kind of interesting about my career is that it used to be my job to facilitate meetings. that's what I did for a living, was try to help people figure out, make plans together and figure out how they were going to work together and things like that. I mean, so I've studied that a lot. I mean, and there's stuff to be learned about that. I mean, I think that's people used to laugh at me when they would ask me what my job was, and I would say, well, it's to help people have good conversations. They were like, don't people know how to do that already? I was like, well, has it been your experience that they do? Because it hasn't been my experience that they do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a way that I feel like I've been kind of lucky, is that I've, gotten to go to quite a bit of training about that, and had the opportunity to read a lot of books and, kind of listen and practice a little bit and hear what people say. But so, I mean, that certainly helps some.
Yeah.
And I think each of those different kinds of kind of conflictual situations that you can be in have a little different trick to them, I mean, it's one thing when you write for the paper and somebody gets mad at you. Because then it's like, well, I have my opinion, you have your opinion. I mean, why get too upset about that? Everybody's telling their own story, and everybody has a right to do that, I feel like.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit different from when you're trying to get something done, and it's something that you really care about, and you really feel like you have a better way of doing it than other people do. Which I've definitely been in that situation before. I mean, I guess that's a little arrogant sounding, but it's like, sometimes I'm sure most people have. You're in a meeting, you're trying to get something done, and you feel like you have the best way to do it, and then other people, for some reason, don't see it that way.
Yeah, or you feel like you're having the wrong conversation.
Yes.
And we want to do this, but what we're talking about right now is really kind of a waste of time. And you feel like you're beating your head against the wall a little bit. Yeah.
Right.
So what are some of your tricks that you've used?
Well, part of it is, I think once upon a time, I used to think, let me see how I want to say this. So I think there's different kinds of problems. There's problems that are not really problems. You just need to agree to do something. And it doesn't really make that much difference what you do, as long as everybody kind of agrees to it and they all stick with it. You know what I mean? But then there's some problems that the things that we've been trying haven't worked. And so we need to do something different.
Yeah.
And those kind of situations, generally there are some creative people who have ideas that they want to try, but creative people are just the worst, right? I mean, nobody wants to do what they just, they're hard-headed and they don't want to do, what anybody else wants to do. So I think when you're in that kind of situation, basically what has to happen is that creative person just kind of has to go out on their own and collect around them other people who, instead of starting with the group and trying to get the group to agree with them, they need to go out and collect a group that agrees with them and do what they're going to do.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're from Waco, I think Jimmy Doral is a good example of that. He doesn't necessarily enjoy, as far as I can tell, participating in groups where, you start with the group and you're going to decide what to do. But he's very good at having an idea and then gathering a group around him and doing it. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing, is just to realize that there's those two different situations, and just to realize that if you have an idea that's kind of a different idea, you're probably not going to sell the group on it. You're probably going to have to just go do it.
Yeah.
Find your own group and do it.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
But there's a whole lot of work that, that is not like that.
Sure.
It's just, so we can all just decide we're going to do this.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful to think about when we are in situations where there's a problem to tackle or something that needs to get done, it's not always, depending on the makeup of the group, paying attention to those dynamics. That's I think that only comes probably through experience, that you are able to identify that and say, this happens over and over again in a group, where somebody feels like a visionary that has an idea and wants to run with it, and it's not going to work for them to just sort of join the group and and kind of facilitate some sort of common goal together.
And watch their idea be chipped down to a little nub by all the people who don't want to do.
And it's also helpful to recognize that it's not necessarily bad. It's just that it doesn't function well in that particular situation.
Right.
Because I think what is hard is when, I've been in groups trying to facilitate a group or trying to work with a group towards something, and there's lots of these dynamics that you're talking about going on in the group, and it can be really, really frustrating to feel like we're not getting anywhere. Like, people are stuck on certain things that are not important, or really, I can remember a particular group. We spent so long just trying to pick a name for the group.
Oh my gosh.
Like, picking a name for a group is got to be one of the worst activities. And yet it's something that you have to do in some sense to get buy-in, and it's not a bad activity to help people kind of form a bit of an identity around a group, but it can also be the worst. It can be so horrible.
And I think too, there is, there's always kind of a tension between the general group and the expert, like in that particular situation that you're talking about, there's the general group of people, and then there's some people who are really good at coming up with good names. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not everybody is good at that. That's a skill that some people are good at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's a shame to let the common group come up with something kind of blah when you have somebody who's really good at it who could come up with something good. So, I think you kind of have to decide that at some point in the process. You have to decide, are we going to, as this just general group of people who have more and less skill in this area, just going to come up with something? Or are we going to basically hire somebody, whether you pay them or not, to give us some good options that we're going to go with?
Yeah. Yeah, that's important to decide what is worth facilitating a group kind of figuring something out, and what is really just let somebody come up with it, and we'll
and then we'll vote. We'll pick out of the top 3 or something like that.
Sure. Yeah.
But because I think one thing that's really important that I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because this one particular committee that I'm on is, it's like you have to, what's important for what because I have opinions about everything, so I can go to a meeting, and contribute, and I can talk. Like, when everybody's being quiet, I always feel sorry for the facilitator. So I always say something, whether it's useful or not, just because I don't like it to be quiet. I feel sorry for the person running the meeting when nobody's talking. But one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is that it's really important to think about who is going to own the problem once the meetings are over. Because I've been to a very common experience for me is to have a lot of meetings and decide on something, and then nobody actually does that something that you decided on.
Yep.
It just never actually happens. Yeah. And I think that is maybe, or my current theory is that is maybe a symptom of the people who did all the talking and influenced the decision were not the same people as the ones who own the problem after the decision is made. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really important thing. It ends up not being very effective because the people who are going to do the actual work, that wasn't their way of seeing it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, people probably have had that experience, whether it's at a job or working on committees or working with groups trying to do something, of getting to the end of a meeting and whoever's leading the meeting, or somehow the meeting ends and you still don't know who's going to do anything.
Right.
That is the worst. It really drives me. That. It drives me so crazy.
Yeah, I try not to ever leave a meeting where if nobody else says it, I'm the one who says, "Okay, what's our plan? What's the plan?
Yeah,
who's doing what?"
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because you've wasted all that time if you don't, unless the purpose of the meeting was just to talk,
That's true.
Share ideas and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
then you've kind of wasted all that time. But I mean, it is interesting, kind of back to that idea. There's just a tension to me between expertise and the will of the public. Mm-hmm. Because there's some things that just need to be decided by the will of the public. You know, whose statue do you want in the middle of town? Mm-hmm. I mean, let's vote on that and decide. Yeah. But there's some stuff that really experts need to help you with, Yeah. What kind of dam are we going to have on our river?
Right, right.
Where are we going to put the landfill? I mean,
exactly.
Those things are things that need some expert. It's not just opinion, there needs to be some expert.
Yeah. No, and I'll just say that my experience on the committee with the city had to do with the landfill, and I'm not an expert on landfills, and I learned a lot because people from the city did presentations to us about landfills. But even so, I know that they're extremely complicated and engineered and technical. It used to be we just dug big pits and we threw all our trash in there, and we realized that was not a good way to deal with our trash. And so now they're highly regulated in the United States. And it was so weird for the community to have all these opinions about something that there were zero experts, including myself. It felt so weird.
It's like, really? Is this an okay thing to do?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I understand, landfills are always going to be that way in any community because nobody wants a landfill. There's just a stigma. Sure. It's a topic that has to come up for every community at some point, and nobody wants one near them. And so it really gets people worked up. But we, for 99% of the time, we don't think about our trash, and we leave it to the experts. It's only until it becomes an issue and we have to think about it, and suddenly people become experts and decide that their opinion really should be the one that carries the day. And I mean, it's hard because there are so many things like that where we need experts to explain things to us because modern life is so complicated, and yet we don't trust experts either. Right. And that makes it even more complicated.
Right. And it was, and I would not want, no expert is expert enough is the problem.
There's always someone else who has an opinion too, has a differing, maybe expert opinion.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very interesting. The landfill thing is a great example, because you have people who feel passionately about where it should not be.
Right.
But like I say, we got to have one.
Well, I really like
that was another one that I wrote something in the paper about that I got some.
Oh, really?
Feedback on. Yeah.
Did you get to take someone else out to breakfast?
I did. That's exactly what I did. So I wrote the article in the paper, which basically what I said was, I'm not going to go get a degree in environmental studies. Mm-hmm. So I trust my city manager to pick the place where the landfill ought to be. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's drinking the same water I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why he would be at all. I don't see anybody making a bunch of money off of this or something.
Right. No.
I mean, there was a little bit more to it than that.
Sure.
But anyway, had several arguments.
So is your go-to
But anyway,
is your go-to move to invite people to breakfast? Is
I
that
do.
That's kind of the
It is. If they're mean.
If they're mean, invite them to breakfast.
Yes. Well, if they say something that to me, it's one thing to disagree with what I'm saying, but it's another thing to say, she's a terrible person. I may be a terrible person, but they don't know that.
Yeah. Get to know me first.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you'll get to decide.
I at least want that. But anyway, I asked this person who disagreed with me vehemently out to lunch, and she invited 2 or 3 other people, so it was like me and all her friends.
Oh boy. Wow.
So that was an interesting dynamic too. But we had a great conversation. There wasn't anything wrong with it. I didn't change her mind about anything, and she didn't change my mind. But I felt like we had a pretty good conversation, and I felt like my point in doing that is just for people to realize that we're both humans. We have our opinions, but we don't have to be mean to each other.
Yeah. I think it's I like that. I think it's not most people's reaction. If you got a mean letter to the editor or somebody that was upset with you, our reaction normally isn't to invite people to lunch or to breakfast. We normally vent to people that we love, or we complain about it, or we find another avenue to try and address, things that we're upset about, what someone said. And I think what's great about doing something like that is because it sort of takes people by surprise a lot of times. And
yes, it does.
There's a and there's a great I think surprising people.
You're a weirdo.
Yeah. Well, there's something to be said for people thinking you're a little off.
Yeah.
Or that, like, what is really going on here? I remember reading a book about nonviolence and the way that people found different ways to respond to, say, somebody intruding in their home. And that was one of the things that they talked about, too, is there was a story of this woman who believed in nonviolence, and this man, she woke up to someone standing over her bed, which sounds absolutely terrifying. Like, I'm going to give you nightmares just talking about it. But she was very taken aback, and she said, I was completely scared, totally scared. But she asked this person, what time is it?
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of stopped, like, it cut the tension a little bit, and was like, what time is it? And then I think she ended up, this man was hungry or poor and was breaking in to try and get something he could sell or steal money or whatever. I don't remember. And they ended up sitting at her kitchen table. She gave him some food, fed him. I think even let him sleep on the couch, and said she was completely scared the whole night. But she said, in the morning you have to leave, and you cannot do this anymore. You can't break into people's houses. And nothing happened. He got up and left. And something about surprising people with the unexpected, not reacting defensively, not reacting the way that people that we're used to reacting, the ways that we're in our culture, most people are reacting to disagreement. It sets a different tone. It can really change the whole conversation. So I don't know if you have any other surprising things you've done or said to people that you have, that tips or tricks or things that might surprise people when they disagree. But I love inviting them to a meal. I think that really all of a sudden changes from, we're enemies to let's sit down and share some food. And that's a completely different
even if you don't, and feeling. Like I say, even if you don't even talk about the thing, the thing that was you're just being people to each other.
Yeah. Even arguing through the opinion page is a little bit like arguing on Facebook.
Right.
It's very impersonal.
It's very easy to forget that the other person is a person.
Yeah.
I think one of the best things that I ever went to, once upon a time, I went to some kind of conference. I can't remember what it was, but it was this great conference that was put on by these people. I forget the name of the organization, but it had started in the wake of the bombing of abortion clinics.
Okay.
When was that? Like in the 80s or something like that? It was a long time ago.
Uh-huh.
And so anyway, when these bombings happened, this group of people was like, oh my gosh, we got to figure out how to, have a conversation. We can't, we can't start throwing bombs at each other.
Right. Yeah.
They were like, how can we, and of course, abortion, that's such a divisive issue that's really hard for people to talk about. But this organization decided that's what we were going to talk about. And the first thing that they decided was that they had to figure out a way. They wanted to get people, from both sides of the issue, but they had to figure out a way to get the people to speak for themselves instead of speaking for some group that they felt like they were representing. Yeah. And so the meetings were always like in secret. And it was just very interesting to read about it. But one of the questions that they would start these conversations with was they would go around the room and they would say, what is the heart of the matter to you when it comes to this issue? What is the heart of the matter when it comes to you? And it was just interesting. And I've used that question so many times now.
Yeah. Great question.
Let's just go around the room and let's just have everybody say, well, what's the heart of the matter when it comes to this? And just have everybody express it in their own way. And that has just been such a fascinating, I've done that at church with different groups and just all kinds of different groups. And it's just very interesting because there's not very many, we don't make very many times for ourselves to hear that from each other.
And often in those conversations about issues that are divisive or controversial, when we talk about them, we very quickly and easily get sidetracked. And then we become, I've just noticed so many times where the conversation strays very quickly into other territory or these side roads where now we're arguing about, what year this thing happened. Or or something that is so far afield from what the actual issue is that we were trying to talk about. And I love that question. I love a good question. I think a good question can really, really cut through. And that question, asking somebody, what is the heart of the matter to you? What does it really mean to you? It also gets at something deeper, and more personal with people. And, I know in the abortion debate, for example, people who are, I don't like the terms pro-life and pro-choice, but the people who are pro-life often come from a very life is very sacred and meaningful. People who hold that in a real serious, convicted way, that it's a heart matter for them,
Right.
They really mourn the loss of life, and they mourn that this is happening, and are very think very deeply and about it in a lot of ways, or feel very deeply about that issue. And when we talk about it from the other side, about pro-choice, we talk about them as bombing clinics, or what I mean. We start characterizing people and their positions
terrible.
As caricatures, and you pick the worst example of somebody on that side, and then everybody else. But you'll meet the nicest people who hold completely opposite views from you, and if you hear their heart about it, it makes you stop and think. They have really deep, profound reasons for beliefs that they have. Right. And I think we can all maybe respect that to agree, but we can, and it gives us more to talk about, really. Because I think often we find that that's a common value, right? I think when we do that.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of times there is, how do I want to say this? If you can take the discussion to a higher level, you can find where the common value is, and then maybe work your way back down. But I mean, sometimes you can't, sometimes people just have really different, their hearts are in really different places. But almost always, if you don't understand what the heart of the matter is to the person you're talking to, you're not going to have a fruitful conversation with them about it because, if you're arguing your way about what's important to you, they're not going to hear you because they're in a different place. And same the other way too, that they're not, if you don't understand what it is that they care about,
right,
or why it's important to them, then chances are, we're so dumb, we're just so dumb about how we do this. It just kills me. We think we're going to, yell at people and say, you're an idiot and you're da, 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 da. And what do we think? Do we think these people are going to say, you're right, I am an idiot?
Yeah, right.
Right. My eyes have suddenly opened and I understand. Thank you very much for explaining this. Of course not.
Yeah.
Have you ever once done that with somebody else? Has anybody else ever once convinced you of something by yelling at you about something? No.
Right.
I can
It's
tell
so
you the answer
true.
is no.
Yeah.
But we keep doing it.
Yeah.
We just keep doing it. I don't know why we keep doing it.
Well, I think one of the reasons maybe that we do it is we don't know how to talk to people. We don't have better tools, We're not being taught in school and in our institutions how to have these conversations. Right. And it's not being modeled from the top down for sure, right? So the way that different groups engage debate and dialogue is the same way that we're all yelling at each other. When I think about activists that I know, groups that I've been involved with, it's sort of the old playbook of being the loudest. The loudest one is going to win. And also, I think people that are yelling, like you're saying, nobody has listened to the heart of the matter when it comes to them. And they feel strongly about something, and it seems to me that nobody has been willing to hear them yell and say to them, "You sound really passionate about this. Can you tell me where that comes from?" And it's so hard for us to stop because our lizard brain kicks in, right? when someone's yelling at us. And so it's so hard to stop and go, wow. And it gets back to curiosity. If you're curious about people that are yelling a whole lot about something, then it helps you to be like, well, that's just weird. Why are you yelling so much? Because you must be really upset and really passionate about this. And then asking some questions about tell me
what makes this so important to you.
Tell me more, right? Because that usually breaks down the yelling, and eventually you get to a point where you don't have to agree, but you're not yelling at each other anymore, and you usually find some respect, I think, and some mutuality in those conversations. Do you have any other really good questions that you like that are helpful questions? I know this wasn't a question I sent you ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, that's my all-time favorite, and that kind of goes off in different directions usually. But sometimes I'll ask, do you have a personal story that goes with that? That depends on the situation, because you're not always in a situation where people want to tell their personal stories, but sometimes if you can get to that level of conversation, you can I mean, you can just understand each other better. You're not always gonna. I mean, one thing, I think another thing that I've really through the years kind of, or that I'm kind of starting to think about now that's different from how I would have thought about things even just a few years ago, is people, you get to know people in the community. And these are not really your close friends, right? These are people that you have kind of a thin relationship with. You're just on some kind of committee with them, or, right. You don't really know them super well. But just by the fact of doing something together, you're building a little bit of a relationship. So, the next time you're on a committee together, it's you have just that little bit of relationship, So even when maybe you disagreed with each other the first time, the second time it's like, oh, well, this is my buddy that I know from the other committee. So, you kind of get to know each other a little bit more. And it gets to the point, really, I feel like sometimes people will go along with you just because they know you, It doesn't really, they don't necessarily agree with everything that you say, but they just know you because they've done things with you, or they've seen you around and about being involved in things. And so it's not, so little of it has anything to do with logic, I guess is what I'm saying. So little of it has anything to do with like reasoning and stuff like that. A lot of times it's relationships, it's your past experiences, it's what are your emotions around this issue. And you're not necessarily going to have a meeting with a bunch of bankers and stuff where you ask them, what are your emotions about this issue? But if you can, but
and then you close the meeting with kumbaya.
Right, exactly.
Everybody put your arms around your neighbor.
I get people to tell their stories. Sometimes they're a little better done. And
I really like this image though of a meeting of bankers in which they're in a circle with their arms, around each other, next to each other, swaying. Right, the bankers have. Ashley has brought them to this pinnacle moment of connection and relationships, and they don't even remember what the issue was, why they were having this meeting, but they're. But I think what you're saying is very, very.
That happens to me all the time.
You could become a guru or some kind of start your own.
You'd be surprised. Your own thing. I've had so many meetings like that, but then we have like a pact of.
You never talk about it.
You never
talk about it afterwards. That's right. But you're right that we want to think we're very rational and logical. I think of myself as like, as you were saying before, like you have the right answer and you feel like you really know what we should do, or I've just thought rationally about this, or I know, and we don't like to think of ourselves as driven by emotions or being irrational, or that relationships are more important. We kind of put that down in the like negative sense of nepotism, where relationships mean everything, and then nobody there's no merit that kind of gets you in the door. But the idea that it's all logical and rational, and we just have this meritocracy, and it's very clear and clean, and that's just not what humans are. That's just not how we function. And it's helpful to just to remember that even on a committee or even in a group of bankers, it's still all about relationships. It's still all about connecting with people. And those people who are good at banking or whatever their job is, that we kind of maybe even, us hippies like you and me, we maybe look down on them. It's still,
get that. I guarantee
there's still relationships.
Everybody who sells anything in the world gets that.
Yeah, exactly. It's not rational to buy this grill that's $1,000, that's a green egg or whatever, but But some sales guy convinces you about the cookout you're going to have with your neighbors, and suddenly you've invested in
green egg.
Yeah, you
Voila.
got a green egg. Hey, green egg, if you're out there, you can sponsor this podcast by contacting me at wdtatpodcast@gmail.com. All right, back to the show. Oh man. Well, man, I think we could probably, I might have to have you back on, because I feel like there's things we didn't talk about that we probably could talk more about. But I do like to wrap up episodes with 3 things: something that we learned today, something that we could do for ourselves and for others, and then something that we could share that's a recommended resource, book, a movie, a website, anything. And I will go first. I always go first to give you time to think.
To think about it.
Yeah. Something that I learned is that Ashley Bean Thornton had a conversion experience at 45 years old in New Orleans, cleaning up from Hurricane Katrina. And the thing that really sticks with me about that story is I turned 40 this last year, and throughout this year have had some of that, when you turn certain big numbers or whatever, you start thinking about, whoa, what have I been doing all these years? And how did I get here? And what am I going to do? And how much time do I have left? And so I always love those stories about people who learn things as they're getting older, or have these moments like you're saying, I've known you only since you had that experience. So I didn't know you from before that. And so I've known you as this person who is very engaged in the community and all of that. And so it's interesting to see different stages of life. We can be growing and changing, and it's important to remember that. And that's something I want to hang on to. I read this really amazing story recently. Someone was sharing about their grandmother after they had passed away, and they talked about their grandmother learning to play Dungeons and Dragons as
that's terrific.
As a senior, as someone who was battling pancreatic cancer at the time, and got super into it and was doing all these amazing things and playing, Dungeons and Dragons with this group, and how cool that was to experience them even in their last months, learning and experiencing life in that way. I thought was really beautiful. And so that's something I learned from your story, want to hang on to for my own story. Something we can do is invite people out to eat, and especially the mean people. That's another. That's
I'm
another
sure they
one
don't
of my.
think they're mean themselves.
No, they don't think that, but they don't know yet. They don't know yet because they haven't been invited. And I love that, and I think that's a great idea of something you can do. It doesn't feel like you're changing the world just by inviting somebody out to eat, but doing something that kind of maybe is a little different or surprising people. It might make somebody think you're a weirdo, but then when you have that meal and that conversation with them, now at least you know each other on a human level for whatever comes next after that. A resource, gosh, I don't know if I have a recommendation for it could be for Christians or for non-Christians. It's a book written by a Christian called The Powers That Be by Walter Wink. The story that I told about the lady who was surprised in the middle of the night by a break-in and asked him what time it was is in that book. And he's writing about a theology of nonviolence from a Christian perspective, but it has lots of really good information just in general about nonviolence and ways to respond to conflicts. All right, that's my 3. Ashley Bean Thornton, what do you got for me?
So what was the first one? You got to come and walk me through this.
Sure. Something we learned?
Something we learned.
Or something from the conversation that stood out to you?
Well, I just think how important it is that we learn how to have these kinds of conversations. You know, that there's learning involved to it. You're not, most of us are not just naturally good at it. Somebody has to teach you, or, you know, that maybe you read something about it, or, you know, it's helpful to learn about it some. You know, that I think most of us kind of take for granted that we're good at it, but we're not good at it.
Right. It takes work.
Yeah, it does take a little bit of work. What's
something you can recommend for people to do, an action item? And I stole yours, so you can't use inviting people to eat.
Well, I think what I would say is, and maybe this is copping out on this question, but I think what I would say is get involved in the community. You know, I mean, coming from a place where I wasn't involved.
Yeah.
But I mean, get involved, go do something, you know, be on a board or be on a committee, or, you know, I mean, find something that you care about and participate in it to the point that you get aggravated with somebody and then stick with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I highly recommend getting involved and sticking with something until someone irritates you.
Yeah.
It's a good measure of like you're really committed. If you've gotten involved enough in something that somebody irritates you, it means that you're involved. You're committed and it matters to you. So yeah.
And then I think what you learn from that, or at least one of the things that I feel like I've learned from that, is that, you know, you're aggravated with somebody, but that goes away. Usually, you know, I mean, you might not be able to work through it on that one particular thing, but I mean, usually it goes away, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you form these connections in the community that kind of make the world go round, you know? I mean, I guess that's the thing that I would recommend people do. Just go, you know, get out and go do something, you know, that allows you to, you know, just kind of take the risk. Don't let being annoyed make you quit doing something.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're all going to be annoyed at something.
Try to get over that hump.
Yeah, exactly.
I think some people drop out sometimes.
Don't necessarily.
When it gets annoying. Yeah. Well, do you have any recommendations, resources? You are very well known around Waco for starting Act Locally Waco, which is now
the best resource. No.
Which is now a Waco. If you live in Waco, it is the best resource. If you live in Philadelphia, it might not be so helpful.
Not so great.
but Philadelphia might have a Act Locally Philadelphia of some sort. Yeah.
They might. But what I would say is, you know, kind of going back to that theme that most of us are not good at this and we need to learn about it. I mean, one of the most helpful books that I ever read, and it is, a lot of people think it's really cheesy, but I thought it was very helpful, was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole chapter in it about seek first to understand and then to be understood. You know, like I say, a lot of people thought that was a really cheesy book, and I've had people make fun of me plenty of times for because I used to teach from it. But that is really good advice. Seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Yeah.
And I think he does a terrific job of kind of explaining what that means and giving some examples of how you can make that a part of your life. I mean, but to me, that's a really good resource that's kind of fallen out of popularity. But
yeah, I remember growing up. I remember growing up that my mom had read that book and recommended it to me. I don't know how many times in my life, and I still to this day have not read it. But it is now on my list, and I do own it, so I will be reading it. Now that Ashley Thornton has recommended it, I can't not read it. Finally,
just that one chapter, you know.
Oh, just the one chapter. Okay.
I mean, some of the other stuff in it's really good too. But I mean, that chapter really, to me, is around this particular topic, just super insightful.
Mm-hmm.
Seek first to understand, then to be understood is just a very hard discipline to stick with.
Yes.
And also
very good advice.
Good advice.
Yes. It's been really great talking to you. And
yes, it has. It's been
thanks for sharing your stories and all your wisdom. And
thanks for doing this podcast. What a great idea to just.
Oh man, it has been so fun. It's a great excuse to talk to some of my favorite people, such as yourself. And hopefully it's helpful. It's helpful to me, getting to hear. I pick up something new every time I talk to somebody, and hopefully it's helpful to other people to, as you said, have better conversations and try to make life a little more wonderful.
Oh, I feel very lucky to be included in this. That's super.
Thanks for joining us today on We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. If you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Help us spread the word by sharing it on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with the handle @WDTAT Podcast. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can support the podcast by visiting our website at wdtatpodcast.com and clicking on support. You can make a one-time donation or consider becoming a monthly supporter through Patreon. You'll receive bonus content and access to patron-only benefits. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you. Leave us a voicemail by going to our website and clicking Send Voicemail. Your voicemail could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at wdtatpodcast@gmail.com. Many thanks to Neil Curran and Infielder for the use of their music. You can find more of their music online at infielder.bandcamp.com. A final thought from Brené Brown. The willingness to show up changes us. It makes us a little braver each time. Until next time, keep showing up and keep being brave.
What are you gonna do?